Very good. Good evening. This is the Council Rock Policy Committee meeting for Thursday, November 30th at the 30 North Chancellor Street. We'll be reviewing two policies this evening. The policies we'll be reviewing are Policy 103, which has to do with non-discrimination in school and classroom practices, and we'll also be reviewing Policy 248, which is unlawful harassment. We'll go around our table and everybody will do the introductions as we normally do. We are, in addition to our members of staff and the administration, we are also accompanied tonight by one of the representatives of the Board Solicitor's Office at East Bergen Gray. So I'm Jerry Grupp. I'm the committee chair for the Policy Committee.
Joanne Summer, I'm one of the solicitors for the school district.
Rick Stepper, I'm a visitor from Holland.
Kathleen,
So I live in Holland.
Kathleen Mulholland, School Board Director.
Mark Weinstein, citizen, visitor.
Lori Prusich, Northampton resident and parent, and member of the Diversity and Inclusion Council.
I'm all those things too.
Andy Black, School Board.
Ed Tate, School Board.
Robert Frazier, Superintendent.
William Holmes, member of the Diversity and Inclusion Council and resident.
Christine Taylor, Human Resources.
Mike Thorward, Board. Matt Ferguson, IT Director.
Very good, thank you. I'll turn it over, Christine, you're hosting both of these for us this evening? Or is it
Actually
Joanne?
going to just welcome Joanne and turn it over to Joanne because her work on these policies has been extensive, both in the original revisions that happened about a year ago, and then her work most recently with the OCR. So I feel like Joanne would be the best person to speak to it. She has been so closely involved. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Joanne. Thank you for being here tonight.
No problem. As all of you know, the school board is always tasked with revising and reviewing the policies that it has in place to make certain that those policies are in accordance with state and federal laws and regulations and guidance from different governmental agencies. And so my comments are directed to both policies 103 and 248, which were reviewed by me, by the Pennsylvania School Boards Association, and by the Office of Civil Rights. The school district also belongs to the Pennsylvania School Boards Association Policy Network, and the Policy Network monitors changing laws relating to different areas of education law and the business of education, and provides to us template policies that its council have reviewed as well. Policy 103 was last reviewed and revised in August of 2016. At that time, we went through a pretty extensive review to bring it in line with the requirements of Title IX as well as Title VII and the other guidance that was issued. Thereafter, in response to a September of 2017 guidance issued by the Office of Civil Rights, we undertook another policy review of Policy 103. And in conjunction with that, I have been in touch with regularly the Council for OCR, as well as OCR investigators, and have provided copies of our policies to them. We have communicated back and forth about revisions, and what you see before you is what we got the most recent comments from OCR 2 days ago. So what you see before you is our incorporation of OCR's comments, and after my discussion with OCR. And so OCR has not seen this final draft or has not had the opportunity to review it. I sent it to OCR, but
Just as a point of reference, because we're members of the public, OCR standing for?
The Office of Civil Rights. And the Office of Civil Rights' mission is to make certain that Title IX is complied with by school districts and public entities, both in the public school setting as well as the institutions of higher education, And they also review policies under, in accordance with Title VII, as well as all the other non-discrimination policies. There's a Division of Compliance in the Pennsylvania Department of Education as well. They have a lesser role, unless they receive a complaint, I suppose. But mostly the federal government, the federal agencies do the review of district policies, and they typically take, random districts and take a look at what they have, and then ask them to make changes or comment on the district's policies. And so we undertook this beginning in September of 2017.
Was that by request, Rose?
Yes.
Okay.
I should tell you that the guidance that OCR issued in September of 2017 was applicable specifically to institutions of higher education, and was written to address issues in higher education, not in the public school system. That said, OCR took the position that, public school districts should review it, which we did, and take some of the language from their guidance and incorporate it into our policies, which we did. However, as of recently, with the change of administration, the September of 2017 guidance from OCR has been withdrawn, in the sense that it is no longer has any force and effect, at least according to the investigators. However, that does not mean that we don't want to take a look at it. That doesn't mean that we should ignore it, because obviously that was the government's interpretation of Title IX as of September 2017. So things are changing rapidly, apparently, in that regard. So what you have before you is a policy that, in policy 103 and 248, we tried to parallel the investigative process in both policies to be similar. We've listed the procedure that students should follow to file complaints. We've listed the things that are a violation of our policies, and we've provided a method by which students make complaints, the way in which, to whom they make the complaints, the way in which complaints are investigated, the way the response to the complaints are made, and the reporting requirements to the superintendent and to the board. The idea behind all of these policies is to prevent the occurrence of discrimination in any form in the school district, as well as to correct the instances of discrimination that we find, including harassment, sexual harassment, any instances of sexual violence, and to prevent them from happening in the future. So the investigators will receive training in how to conduct the investigations, and the remedies for a finding of harassment or discrimination is going to be designed to prevent it, to correct it immediately, and to prevent it from happening in the future. And I can go through each and every change to the policy if you wish, but generally that is the purpose of the policy, to provide a method by which there's a complaint procedure, that complaints are addressed, investigated, reported, and policies are put in place to inform students and the members of the public of these complaint procedures, of our prohibitions against harassment, against discrimination, against any kind of violence in the schools, and to help individuals to understand that they will be heard if there is a complaint. Any questions?
We didn't ramp, based on your new guidance from new administration, we didn't really do anything different.
No, we didn't do anything differently.
We left it as it was. Yeah, good.
But, yeah, there was some suggested language from OCR, which I incorporated
Okay, that's good.
in the last 2 days. But it simply made it more clear that students and these policies are intended to protect students from harassment by anyone who is involved in any school-related activities. So including third parties who may come onto school district premises.
And this covers all,
Yes.
okay.
So when you're on board docs, you'll notice that goldish yellow
Yeah,
color
yeah.
shows what the new inclusions are that were recently added.
What was that?
In the reporting, where it says a district employee, volunteer, or any other person who observes, has a reasonable belief, or is notified, has a reasonable belief. How does that?
Well, it's a reasonable man standard. It is what the reasonable person, you or I, it's your own personal experience. You may view something differently than I, but if you have a reasonable belief in your own mind that you are seeing a violation or that a violation has occurred, then you have the responsibility to report. It's a reasonable man standard. It's a very typical sort of standard.
Right, because I mean, I do sometimes get into conversations about this topic where someone will say, you know, this was offensive, and it's like, oh, really? That's not offensive to me. Well, it is to me. So that would cover those differences in perceptions of people.
Yes, because things can be reported and investigated and determined to not be
Right, so
a
this
violation of district policy.
So this is just that it is reportable.
Correct.
You know, it is interesting, as you look at this in the paragraph, third paragraph under authority, one of the questions I have is this, in the last sentence, it says visitors to district property or a district-sponsored event. And one of the questions, I think this came up when we looked at this one of the earlier times, was, you know, we rent this property to people at different times. And they have an event. And we are whether it's a limited public forum or we're a public asset, we don't sit in judgment upon who rents the property, as long as they carry the appropriate insurance and, you know,
Well, we don't, a visitor to the district is not someone who rents this district property.
well, this says visitors to district property, so that's where I'm confused. That's where,
Well,
maybe that was changed in the.
No.
the OCR's position was that, I had this exact discussion with them about that issue because I explained that we do rent out our properties to entities. For example, perhaps one of the local churches might need to use the facilities. And we don't control that. We don't have a right to control it. And OCR assured me that the language that they provided to us on that would meet their criteria, and they understood that. They allowed me to make a distinction between visitors and independent contractors. So they initially wanted independent contractors to include people who rent district property. And I had a discussion with them about that, and they agreed that we would not define it in that term, that it had a specific legal definition that was not included within Title IX. So certainly you can revise that definition of third party or visitors to the district to exclude those who are independently renting you know, district property. But someone who believes that he or she is a victim of discrimination on a district-owned property that is being rented to someone else,
Right.
could certainly make a complaint to the district. And the district could say, you know, you need to make your complaint to the organization that sponsors the event.
Well, and that's sort of where I'm kind of, which is they may rent the room, and they rented the room, and we have the ancillary parking lot. Now they're at the parking lot, and there's a student event going on at the building somewhere else. So they're under our domain when they're in the parking lot because they didn't rent the parking lot. And an act is an act is an act. But once they get to the room, they can say and do whatever they wish because that's their rented space.
I think we tried to make as clear as we could that that this covered community groups who use district facilities in connection with a district-related event.
That I
And we
agree.
tried to make it clear that it was district-related, district-sponsored activities.
Can we change that? I would ask if not ask, but sponsored implies that we're paying for it. And whether you want to use the word associated, because we have, what?
Sanctioned, I don't know.
You know, there are things that are associated with us that we are doing that are, we're not sponsoring them, but they're associated with us. We don't sponsor the PTO, it pays for itself. It's associated with us, so we would expect them to fall under this. Just make any sense to any other person? Associated, sanction,
Sponsored,
sanctioned.
yeah, I never thought of paying for it.
Well, that's what, it's a school-sponsored event.
I hear you.
So just so I'm clear, Jerry, are you suggesting that people who come in and rent our space, we're trying to disassociate ourselves from being responsible for what happens on school grounds? Or are we trying to say that we want to have maximum, to go after what happens on school grounds?
A group that I despise and could be a political group which has a very narrow spectrum of membership, and they could rent the space legally, and they're allowed to do that, and they're allowed to use the space because they have the insurance property, they're not going to damage it, all these things. They have to provide security if that's appropriate. I can't dictate how they use that room.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
So that's my problem. This was the old ACLU problem in Skokie, which was the ACLU defended the Nazis' right to march because they had a right to use the public space. The ACLU doesn't typically like the Nazis, but they have a right, and then, if the right is the right, and that's our problem, which is.
And so you're talking about, okay. All
Well,
right.
he was asking a different question. I was just saying, just the word that's sponsored, because we don't sponsor, we sponsor things, the Golden Wings, those are things we sponsor because they're us. We're paying for them. It's covered under our insurance and everything else. PTO, I don't know how the PTO pays for it, but I don't know if we sponsor that, but we permit it. Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, I guess we permit it. We don't sponsor it. We don't have a financial stake in it.
You could remove the word sponsored and it would read visitors to district property or those attending a district event.
Or even
Or those at a district event.
Well, it's not a district.
It's an event on district property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's an associated, if I have an association as a school district with the event, so, a political group I don't like has something, I have nothing to do with it. I don't advertise it, nothing, that happens. But
we have a legal specialist over here.
But I'm trying to frame it, I'm trying to give the hypothetical. But if it's a group that, I've endorsed because I'm permitting them to do it, we advertise it, we actually encourage people to be part of it.
Well, I think that they would be covered. On your hypothetical.
Well, under the word sponsored? Oh, I agree, they should be covered, but it's the word sponsored is my issue.
Well,
You used the word
but
sanction.
visitors to, there's two things in this sentence. Visitors to district property or at a district-sponsored event. So that's how we address both of the issues.
Okay.
You're comfortable with it.
I am.
I guess that's just.
I'm comfortable with it. I
gave
argued
instruction.
about it unsuccessfully.
The other thing I had, which was, it was interesting, we're looking at retaliation. Well, there's two things. One, Denise asked a question about the reasonable you know, the reasonable man standard or whatever. This is not, the activities that are covered here are not at all related or out of the same category at all as what we call mandatory reporters for episodes of violence against children. So there's a wholly different level of attention. I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. So that's not the failure to notify, you know, even if you saw something that was egregious, I'm asking.
Well, let me say this. It depends.
Okay, well, that's why we're talking. That's why I'm asking, trying to figure out.
A mandatory reporter who observes a sexual assault might have an obligation
Agreed.
as a mandatory reporter
Agreed.
to report. That would also be a violation of this policy.
Okay.
Would we expect a mandatory reporter to report an incident, you know, under the Child Protective Services Act? Yes. Would we expect them to report under here? Yes, we would expect that they would report. I'm not sure that's the reasonable man. I think Denise's question was more to the I'm offended, you're not.
Right. Well, that's my point.
Situation. But yes, the mandatory reporting policies and the law regarding mandatory reporting policy is not impacted by any reasonable man standard.
No, those would be a subset of this. But my question was, if someone saw something that they took offense to, or you know, I see something and I don't take offense to it, and Mike does. And I'm an employee of the district. There's no recourse against me for not having reported it.
No.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get to, which was differentiate from a mandatory report. Do we have to have any carve out here in terms of order of precedence for those things that are reported to? I don't want investigations to get in the way of one another. That our investigation, there's no element here of timing.
Well, there is
investigation.
a carve out sort of for criminal investigations that are ongoing. The policy does provide that the fact that there is an ongoing criminal investigation would not prevent us from conducting our own investigation unless we're asked by law enforcement to hold off.
Okay.
So, you know, we have an obligation to promptly investigate, and we will do that. But if there are crimes involved that the district attorney's office is pursuing or police are pursuing, and they say to us, we don't want you mucking up our crime scene or our evidence or talking to witnesses, you're going to need to wait. There is a carve out for that in this policy.
And this policy does remind me about the obligation to report to Child Protective Services as well.
Where is it?
Number 13, under notification of rights.
Well, I saw it under investigator shall in terms of time to that.
It's under notification of rights. Yeah.
Notification of
Where appropriate and need to
Got it.
report the incident.
I was looking at the next section where it's the investigator shall also interfaces to that. When we advise someone that they can have a child, that they can have a parent or guardian with them, should we also, particularly when it's the accused, should they also be advised that they could have counsel with them
Counsel is not required.
in terms of informing them they can have counsel?
That is not a requirement of a school district-based secondary school, elementary school, public school setting. It is in the higher education area, but not.
Okay, I knew I saw it somewhere, that's why I was trying to figure out why it's not. Other board questions?
You are, go ahead.
Well, no, there was a board question.
Oh, board, sorry. You have, I know you've been working hard on this, so you're comfortable with this rehash, even with the shifting sands. I mean,
I am.
okay, good. That's what I want to hear.
I just would like to say it is not possible in any policy. Every policy is fluid. It's just not possible to deal with every nuance of every situation that we deal with in the schools on a day-to-day basis. And this board has always been flexible in where we see a problem with a particular policy, like we did this in August of 2016, and now we started redoing it again in March of 2017. We do that.
Now, before I ask if anybody else has any questions, I need to have a little bit of a disclaimer here up front, which is Joanne is here as the board counsel tonight, so she advises the board. So questions or hypotheticals posed to Joanne that would put her into a position where she's providing counsel or advice to persons outside of the board or outside who are not board personnel or administrators. She may defer answering those questions or not respond to them because that's not within her scope of employment here. So she's not here as a representative for the community and providing legal advice to the community. She's here to advise the board. So I just want to make that you're okay with that definition. So I just want to be clear about that. So if we can have a public comment about this one, we're doing one by one. We only have two, but I want to be clear about that from the outset that she's not able to provide or may choose not to provide a response if she thinks it's not within the domain of what her responsibility is.
Jerry, the only thing I'd ask, because this is being recorded, is whoever comments, please state their name.
That'll be fine.
Just the record.
Well, I'm sorry to preface you, but public had any questions regarding this policy?
Will Holmes, for the record. So a few questions. So mainly around, well, number one, just the documentation. So I know it says in there that there's documentation, but what does that actually mean in terms of, where is it documented, who sees it, how long is it stored? And relating to that, it doesn't seem like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we had talked about this the last time this policy was reviewed, but it doesn't seem like the superintendent or the school board is required to receive notification of any investigations or the outcomes. I mean, I saw that they can, superintendent can be notified, but it was kind of an and or. So related to documentation and notification to superintendent and school board, curious about how that goes into this policy.
It is up to the investigator to determine the way in which that investigation is going to proceed and the documentation that the investigator is going to produce, as a work product.
Well, I guess the question then is, can it be documented? Well, put into the policy that the superintendent and the board are notified, because the reason why I say this is when we had a lot of incidents happen over the past year, I think a lot of the comments from board members and superintendents was, I didn't know that happened. And these are pretty major incidents, so.
Well, that's for the board to decide.
Well, I guess my question would be, the policy provides that once there's an incident, there's reporting that goes up to the superintendent. That's the superintendent's aware that there's been.
It says,
right?
I read it says, can be.
So.
It's not a requirement.
Well, it says that the superintendent has the ultimate authority over the director of all of these persons. And while that is also written in the context of an appeal of the determination, they have authority. So I would.
But authority doesn't mean they are aware of what happens.
I read it to mean that when it reported to a building principal, it came up to.
They're called compliance officers.
The compliance officers and then to the superintendent. So it would follow that, or is that a can or a will?
Well, once it goes to the compliance officer, unless there's an administrator really that's the subject of the investigation, it would not necessarily go to the superintendent. The board can have it go to the superintendent and have a report of the incident and the outcome go to the superintendent if that's what the board wants.
Do all of these, go ahead.
Under step 3, investigation, there is language that says the compliance officer shall immediately notify the superintendent and/or his designee.
Yeah.
So I think that answers the question in that when the complaint is received, the superintendent is notified.
Yeah,
But it says or his or designee.
I'm not sure there's gonna be a designee when you get the top 3 people in the district who are reporting to the superintendent.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure what that meant.
I mean, I'm comfortable that you're gonna get that it comes all the way up, and then as to the documentation process, I would assume, and maybe the assumption's the wrong thing, but that, you'll expect that documentation to its end based on the severity of the issue. And if it's
My concern with
severe enough, I would assume that he would notify us, but I don't know if there's a need to say we need to know about everything. It's hard to talk about what, is severe enough.
But I was glad to see
But I don't know
there
if
were
anybody else
privacy
is really-
protections in it too. Student privacy or staff privacy, there are protections in here.
We do have a framework around how we conduct investigations and how they're documented. I would offer that doesn't belong in policy, that would be.
I was gonna ask the question, is this going to administrative regulation?
That would be an AR, in my opinion.
Okay, and then that's where I was gonna kind of go to answer Will's question, to say that the things that you might be interested in terms of detail might be administrative reg versus policy.
Okay. And my other question, and I'm fine with that. My other question was just for clarification, because I know you made the comment about third parties and you had asked, and Mr. Grubb asked some follow-up questions, but just want to get clarification on, because the way I understand it is that if a third party comes on school grounds, they have to abide by school policy.
That's
correct?
correct.
So even if somebody comes and they rent out a space, they still have to, you can't have a Nazi group having a function on school property, correct?
Well, yes, you can, unless district policy would prohibit it because of, a finding on, there's a policy that talks for facility rental. And every organization that wants to rent district policy has to fill out whatever the framework is for that policy. And then there's a determination made. But we cannot discriminate against organizations unless, at all. I mean, we can make determinations that allowing a particular event would be detrimental to school property or a problem with security in the school due to timing or whatever. But we are very limited in our ability to say no.
We have
Some of the councils we're seeing with colleges having.
We had an event a few years ago. We didn't have an event. There was an event at one of our schools a few years ago, which did prompt some queries around that, which did, because of the thought of potential protesters and their own group, there was a requirement, and they complied they had to hire an officer. They had to have an officer present for their event to ensure, and they had insurance too, but they had to have an officer present because to mitigate any potential incidents. So beyond that, we were not able to stop.
The easier thing would have been to say no, but we can't.
We can't say no. Exactly. Just because I don't like them doesn't mean I can't say no.
Yeah, just clarifying.
Yeah, because they, it's not I, but
Understood.
I don't like them. But
Jerry, if I may. Several years ago, and I don't remember the district in New York, there were several schools that.
Do you want to give your name? Just your name.
Rick Stetler from Holland. There were several schools, public schools, that didn't rent their facilities to religious groups. So the ACLJ and some other organizations sued them, and they generally lost, okay? Because religions discriminate based on sex or religion. So they do discriminate, but schools that just said, we're not going to rent to any religious groups, and there were a series of cases. I don't know them all. I read it 10 years ago, I could remember, but I can't remember them all now. But there were a whole bunch of cases on that issue.
All right. Further public comment, questions?
Oh, one more clarification. But so related to that, The other piece of that where third parties are coming on site, you did say if a contractor, vendor comes on site, they are under harassment policy, correct?
Both prohibition, prevention.
Okay, because we had an incident, what was it now, a couple months?
It was over the summer. It was
Yeah, over
August
the
or
summer,
July.
where the contractor came on site with the Confederate flag, and, you know, we kind of brought that to the attention of the school district, and they tackled the situation immediately and told the contractor to leave, but the concern was kind of moving forward, are we being proactive to prevent that? And the feedback was that, which, you know, I'm just being honest, the feedback was that we can't tell a contractor not to do that, which I didn't agree with at the time, but it seems like policy does cover that.
It does.
Okay.
But it isn't.
But
yeah.
this policy is designed to prevent discrimination against students.
Well, there are students.
Okay,
At the school,
I understand that.
But it just, I'm not advocating one way or the other, it's just the complexity of our world. A bumper sticker on someone's car that they drove and parked on school, if it's found to be offensive, it creates, it's just, I'm not saying.
Well, I think what we have to say is when anybody's on school property, you have to abide by the policies of the school district. Do we have the ability to reasonably go out and say, and here they all are, and you have to read all of them? I don't know how realistic that is, but I think that we have to address it, and where we see it broken, as in this case, we have to address it very quickly. And
This is actually the basis for the reasonable man standard, which is because you cannot enumerate all of the situations. That's why the standard is.
Most of the contracts that the school district enters into, all of the contracts the school district enters into with vendors have clauses in them that require the contractor to abide by district policies and specifically the non-discrimination policies.
That's what I was,
Hence,
that's what I
when
figured.
it was addressed, it was immediately rectified. You know,
Right.
And that's.
But just because we're talking to an issue, an item that happened, it is an interesting question because, and I don't ask for counsel, I just say that this is one of the interesting things that comes up in this, which is at the time that happened. So they were not, I mean, I'm not arguing for or against, I'm just saying this is the complexity.
so the question is, they're on the school ground, school's not in session, does policy still apply?
Yes.
So,
Programs going on in the building.
but it
That
doesn't
brought our
matter,
students in.
they're on school property, so it doesn't,
Right.
as long as they're not renting
That's why
out
we're
space.
talking about the framework, when it applies and when it doesn't.
So you address it, but I think you address it saying this is policy, that's why you have to, there's a no.
Construction company, that was not allowed back. So it was not only take it off, but it was also do not come back,
With the flag.
just to be clear, with the flag.
Right, they can come back, but just
Yeah,
not.
you got the flag, stay away.
Yeah. I just think it's important to have the awareness that the school district has authority in contracts to stop a vendor from being able to do that.
Can I go back, before we move off of Will's comments? Page 4 of 6, step 3 that Christine had pointed out, where it says, or his/her designee. I kind of agree with Andy on this one, that in this particular context, there would be no designee. Yeah, page 4 of 6. So would it be problematic to end that with the compliance officers shall then immediately notify the superintendent?
Where are you looking? Give me a reference, Andy.
Step 3, under investigation, second sentence.
The compliance officer shall immediately notify the superintendent,
Yes, period.
period.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah,
I'm just, there would be no designee. These are cabinet members.
right.
My assistant superintendent, director of K-12, and director of HR. So they're really, from a practical application standpoint, would not be a designee.
I put that in, the only reason that it was in there was because in the event that you're not here, there would be someone that would be
I see.
acting
Okay.
in your stead. So that's why I put that there.
If you'd like to confine it to a specific other person, we could do that.
Could be superintendent or assistant superintendent, which one of these people actually is.
That's fine, but at least, but
But at
that
least
would-
it's, yeah.
you know, or in his, you can actually say the superintendent, or in his, her absence, dot, dot, dot.
Well,
And then you only limit where he's going. You're right, they can both.
Or his
yeah.
designee if
it
the superintendent-
seems to me that the superintendent, when the superintendent is not going to be here, is going to say to someone, if something happens, this is what, you're responsible for this. So that is the superintendent's designee, and that was to give the superintendent flexibility to determine who should be the responsible person in his or her absence.
If you want to, I'm asking, if you wanted to say, or in his absence, or in their absence, the designee.
I actually read it as to give him more bandwidth. I hope we don't need it.
No, I hear you, but if you
Just, you know, what if you have two? I mean, you know, if we're gonna do a thorough job, that was what I.
This is
read.
notification, this is.
Yeah, it's just an awareness thing, doesn't mean.
Yeah,
At that point, he has the
exactly.
information, he's gonna say, team's got it handled, he's gonna say serious enough that I gotta get involved, or serious enough that the board needs to get involved.
Right.
Right.
The investigation is still being run by the.
Yeah, okay.
Ron, are you okay if we leave it as and/or designee, or do you want to put a caveat that in your absence?
No, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I was trying to. I'll turn you again now.
Hello, my name is Sheila Johnson, and I'm a senior at Council Rocky North. Now, just looking over these, I have a few questions. Do the teachers that do they get this? All the teachers, everyone that works at the school? And how do you know that they actually read them? Is there like a survey or a test or quiz that you give students to take to make sure they understood the information?
Well, let's take one at a time.
Okay.
So it's the one part about, there is something in here that says it's distributed to
Everybody.
correct?
Parents, students, teachers.
So they're ready to know where it is?
Students, teachers, staff, I read.
Right, it's on the second part, second page, underneath where they give the address of the town, of the school district.
Yep.
The compliance officer designation shall disseminate this policy and complaint procedure at least annually to students, parents, guardians, employees, and the public. I don't know how we're gonna do the public. but-
Website,
Website.
Okay. Okay.
and it's posted in all the buildings, as I understand it, right?
It is posted in the buildings. It's also posted on the main pages of the website. And then Jayla, all the faculty and staff have to sit through like a training session on this policy and the employment policy as well.
Is there attendance taken at those policies? Do they sign in for the training?
I do not know that answer for sure.
So do we have an LMS, learning management system that tracks?
We're moving in that direction. We have a training management system. I don't think that training is tracked in the training session. I think that the training session that they sit through, we have some online components, but they also go over the faculty meetings. And I know they take attendance at the faculty meetings.
We actually have a compliance training system called Safe Schools, and through Safe Schools, we roll out the mandatory reporting requirements. We can roll out local policy like this and have the ability to make sure that it's been reviewed. So that's something that we could put into place.
Listen,
Safe Schools is new, just to us this school year.
And I'm just thinking because of the OCR component of it, that having that as, that could cut two ways. You might get the person who didn't see it, but
It's very easy to do.
and we took it seriously enough that we revised it twice in months. I think we ought to let all the staff know.
so are we giving direction then to the administration to use the Safe Schools
I
training
think that'd be a
program?
good move. It'd be a good use of that technology.
All right, that was easy.
And then I just think my last question is, so regarding what the school policy is for property, you couldn't say no just even if it is breaking the law, but why? Is there like a reason?
If it's
Breaking the law.
Not breaking the law, breaking the school's policy law.
First Amendment.
We had, it's just useful to know, we had there's a thing called, in the school district, we are what is called a public forum therapy, which was a couple years ago, we had someone who wanted to have a newsletter published, proselytizing their religion. Had happened, we were not able to restrict it. We can restrict for student publications such as that, where and when it's available, but we can't make a blanket prohibition that says you can't do it. You know, we did caution the person because at the same time they can promote their religion. Looking at this policy or its predecessor, you can promote your religion, but not to the detriment or demeaning of others for their religions. So you can tell them why yours is great, but you can't tell other people why they're wrong.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. That's all.
Other questions from the public?
Sure. If I
You don't
may.
have to. Introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Mark Weinstein. I have a few questions and requests for clarification. So earlier there was a discussion about whether there was mandatory reporting, and I understand that that's a very specific term with specific legal implications, but I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. On reporting,
Where you,
on
yes, tell us.
page 3 of 6, under step 1, second paragraph on the page, it says, and I'm going to just focus on district employees because you have the authority to, supervise district employees. And it says, so a district employee who observes has a reasonable belief or is notified that a student has been subject to conduct that constitutes a violation of this policy or any other policies prohibiting harassment, says shall immediately report the incident to the principal or assistant principal. So that to me sounds like a district employee who gets this information, makes the observation, him or herself, doesn't have discretion and actually is required to report it to the principal. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
And if a district employee fails to abide by this policy, what is the consequence?
Well, there are all kinds of consequences under the Pennsylvania School Code for discipline of educators.
Right.
So, if the school, I can't really answer the question specifically, but there are statutory requirements for teachers, and there are discipline and contractual collective bargaining agreements that provide for discipline of
And just to be
staff
very,
members.
just to be very clear, when we use the term mandatory reporter, it's actually, we're using it in the legal sense, which is for certain events against children, which are health and safety and child abuse and those things. That's failure to report that as a criminal.
I understand.
Okay, I just want to be, people listening may not. So when we talked about mandatory reports, those are under a criminal statute for failing to report.
Right.
This is a matter of an employment contract.
Right. I guess what I'm wondering is anyone at this table aware of whether it is a term of the collective bargaining agreement that an employee who fails to abide by district policy is subject to some type of consequence for that?
Well, I don't think it's a part of the collective bargaining agreement, but it's part of the school code, 111122, that has the reasons for termination of employment and discipline, and there are yearly evaluations of employees when employees fail to follow appropriate directives. There is a wealth of things that can happen, as in any employment situation. I mean, a school district is an employer just as any other one. So many things can occur.
Okay. All right. And I guess coming back to the earlier discussion about reporting up to the superintendent, I'm wondering, and I understand, the school board, that there are levels of severity of incidents, and the school board isn't going to want to hear about, what might be considered lower level incidents. However, might the school board be interested over the course of a quarter or over the course of a school year to see what the numbers of incidents that have been reported, where the schools are, where incidents have been reported, how those incidents have been resolved, over some extended period of time. And I asked that question hypothetically. I hope the answer would be yes, we're interested, because I would think that you'd want to direct training and communication resources to those schools where you're seeing greater numbers of incidents. And if the school board isn't aware of what's going on, at least over an extended period of time, how can you allocate resources if you don't understand sort of where the issues are? So that's not so much a specific, like, here's the language, let's work out this language, let's wordsmith it. I'm saying, isn't that something that the school board might benefit from, and that the district as a whole might benefit from?
I don't disagree with it, but it's something that the board can request of the administration at any time. So
I think the question becomes is if we want to see it on a regular basis through administrative regulation, or what first came to mind was the CR scorecards, that could be a vehicle for reporting and creating transparency. I don't know if it's the right one per se.
My problem with so much of the reporting that happens on a schedule that just comes out is it becomes very mechanical and people just get it. Hey guys, we signed off on the bus routes. Anybody read them?
Well, Jerry, my point is that's a discussion we should have is can we align on how we would like to see that. I would be interested in what the teams, because my hope would be that the superintendent and team are evaluating this and a whole lot of other things on a regular basis, and are advising us on other grades, test scores, those kinds of things. This is probably some I'd be interested in. I just don't know what the right cadence is or what the right vehicle could be. So I kind of might hear you talking to the team. This is my opinion. But.
I agree. I absolutely would like to see this document. I mean, I've had far too many conversations with people in the public, as Will had said, or somebody had said, about incidents that I don't know. And I don't need to know the specifics, and I actually don't want to. It creates so much work. But to get some kind of global understanding of what we're doing, especially since we're involved in all this training and we're implementing all these things and reviewing our curriculum, there's no way for us to evaluate the effectiveness or the consistency of what we're doing if we don't capture some kind of information to just see how we're trending. And this is an important snapshot of our district, just like anything else that we review. But I agree that I don't necessarily know or want to commit to now what that would look like or what often or whatever, but we certainly need, I believe that we certainly need to collect data on this.
Though collecting data, I don't disagree with.
We're doing it anyway.
Exactly.
We're reporting, so we got documentation. It's just a high level. We got X amount of incidents.
My simple commentary on this is you, as an administration, we have to produce figures each year on school violence. We produce figures each year on suspensions, weapons, drugs. We have numbers, aggregate numbers, and they do go down to the building level. It says South had this, North had that. Initially, we could always drill deeper, but that might be a correlate. Granted, that's required by state law because that is reported to PDE. But at the same time, in the same cycle, on an annual cycle, I'm asking, I'm not telling, I'm not dictating. In the same cycle, at least it will keep it in that same realm because the two items run in parallel. There's violations of this policy and violations of violence, suspensions, expulsions. They run aligned. So that might make
your question. How many, and is it trending up or is it trending down? If we see a number of 50, hey, way too much. If we see 2, maybe not such a big deal. If we see 2 that just went to 7, maybe it's a big deal.
And where are they?
Right.
Yeah.
Because the other thing,
you see a number that you can dig in.
So what happens when we, just using that as our experience, we have an incident at graduation or a prom or something, and we had, 9 suspensions. Just by example, it's a different realm, it wasn't relevant to this policy. You look at it and you go, oh my God, it was one event that happened to have, I'm not defending it, but I'm just saying, is it a trend? No, it's a specific event. It wasn't, if those same 9 had happened over a course of 2 months, that's one response. They were all, in essence, coming from the same party. But I hear your point. I think that you hear the board is not adverse to getting it, but I think we'll look to the administration to help. I think at a minimum, if you include them with the with the suspension expulsion report to PDE to us, that would get us something.
And we may decide, oh, no, we need more.
More frequent, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not averse to getting that data, and I would say that I think it's a good idea. I think getting that kind of data reported to us on a regular basis is a reasonable thing to expect.
Okay.
And I have another question here, and this may be for the solicitor. And the question is, if a student, let me give you a hypothetical, okay? A student who was born as a girl, but identifies as a boy, is being harassed, and the sole basis for the harassment is, in fact, her gender identity, his gender identity. Is that covered under this policy?
In my opinion, it is.
And can you explain
In my opinion, harassment of an individual, no matter what the sexual orientation or the sexual identification, and OCR's position as well, is that you don't need to put the words transgender in to make a policy that prohibits gender harassment and discrimination and make it effective. So my view is, and that, and OCR's view is that the term gender discrimination covers any form of discrimination against an individual because of gender, whether it's gender identity or gender.
And I completely agree with you. The only thing is, I'm not seeing the word gender in here.
I see it. Sex
Where
and
is
sexual
it?
orientation, second paragraph.
No.
It says gender.
Where is that?
Second paragraph.
I'm looking at second paragraph, page 106. The district also prohibits.
Age, gender, race, religion.
I apologize. I was not. Race, color, age, creed, religion, sex, something. I'm not saying gender.
Top paragraph. Very first paragraph, come in.
The district also prohibits any form of harassment on the basis of age, gender, race, religion, creed, ancestry, national origin.
Yours says gender, because mine doesn't. I'm not. No, that's the old policy.
All right.
See, that's the thing. It was in the old policy, it's not in the new policy. So that's
Yeah,
why
sex and sexual orientation.
I keep looking at it and I'm saying, am I going crazy? Everyone's saying it's there. I get paid to look at documents for a living. I don't see it.
It was here.
Well, I think when I had the discussion with OCR, they seemed to think that sex and gender were the same.
Yeah, I don't think that litigants in federal courts are saying that.
Okay, well, I mean, if the board wants to change it to gender, that's.
I'm not, let me
not a
just
problem.
be clear, I'm not suggesting anything be changed. I'm requesting the word gender simply be added because it was part of the old policy and it's unclear to me why it would be taken out as part of the new policy.
I don't have a feeling one way or the other. I don't
You can add it.
know the difference between them, so.
Put it in.
What is it?
I would like to add something. My name is Kathleen Weisman, and I'm looking right now at the Pennsylvania Equity Toolkit. And it says that, let me just read this short paragraph because that could inform how we want to have the language here. This is from the Pennsylvania Department of Education that says, for students to perform the best, students must also feel safe in school. A healthy and safe environment can help our students thrive and every student, regardless of race, ethnicity, which I'm not seeing here, sexual orientation, or gender identity or expression should be provided the opportunity to learn free from discrimination, fear, or harassment. So that part of having the word gender identity or expression comes from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. And also ethnicity.
Ethnicity is here.
Okay, also ethnicity, okay.
Yeah, it actually is there.
I'm fine with adding gender. I want to be careful about PDE and OCR are not perfectly aligned. And this, in many ways, many of the aspects we have to look at here are regarding the Office of Civil Rights. It's a It's a different standard. That, I appreciate, that may be PDE's reference, but it may not be part of code. So it may not have the same, we're trying to, we're in that spot here where we're trying to be responsive to the OCR, Office of Civil Rights. So I appreciate the reference, but you understand that.
Well, I think I don't hear anybody at the table disagree.
I'm fine with
the spirit of what we're trying to get. I would look to council to word it in a way that we believe is completely inclusive.
Well, I think adding gender is.
Yeah,
fine.
that's.
Inclusive. I was not aware, to be honest with you, I was looking at, did not see that it was not there.
No, I felt that.
And given that it's posted and everything, I mean, I think it should be made simple and clear to all those different people that, the staff, public, everybody that's gonna see it, so.
Sure. Good with that.
Jerry, are you worried that by adding the word gender right up the top, you're going to get all the bathroom litigation? I don't have any objection to gender, including in harassment, anti-harassment. But if you put it here, are you going to get everyone saying, okay, we've got to have bathrooms despite what happened with Obama and Trump overturning that executive order?
What does the bathroom have to do with harassment? I just don't understand.
Well, I'm just telling you what would happen in the litigation. They would say you can't discriminate based on gender identification. You're not letting me go into that woman's room. You're discriminating. That's what could happen.
One of the things that, my understanding is that what PSBA, Pennsylvania School Boards Association, has advised districts is that given the current state of flux, Joanne, please correct me if I'm.
No, go ahead.
That there's too many unknowns, so that trying to write specific policy to speak to all these issues would be futile at this point. So,
And not
I think
just
that-
PSBA, I think OCR has the same position, especially now.
Right, so I think adding the word gender is a great idea, but I don't think we're opening a can of worms that's not already.
And it was in our prior policies, so it's not a new thing.
Yeah, just to be clear, when we say prior policy, we mean the existing policy.
Yes, the existing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Shouldn't be prior policy.
So as a board, I'm looking at board members, we're
Yes.
including the word gender.
Yes.
Yes.
Are we, so we're including the word gender. Are we including the word gender as a general change for everywhere that we refer to sex or sexual orientation? We would include the word gender throughout the document, wherever.
Just like it is in the current.
Okay, just.
Can I make, just to make everyone feel good, can you run it by OCR, have one last discussion? Just-
They're not gonna have a problem with that.
They're not, okay, then we're good. Just, that's fine, good.
So thank you. I just have one more question. There was a reference to the administrative regulations that flow from this particular policy. I was wondering where we might be able to get a copy of those, because I don't think
On the
they're
website?
available. They're on the website?
If you go to the policies page, there's a link to administrative regulations. Click on that,
Okay.
it takes you to the list of all the.
And I would just anticipate the administrative regulations are written to support the policies in many regards, that they're either where the policy may not, if you've ever worked in industry, in certain regulated industries, we have SOPs, and within the SOPs, we then have work instructions. And the work instructions are how you achieve the functions of what the SOPs are. So the administrative regs, the reason I make this statement is the administrative regs may be modified there within the domain of the administration. They may be modified to encompass what we're talking about tonight.
Right.
So they're gonna catch up. They're not there.
So if you look at them today, they may not align with what we just went through today.
And this is a larger question, but based on what this committee does here tonight, when would these proposed revised policies be presented for a vote to the full board?
Well, the way this works now, and I'm gonna, we're gonna try and time box this because we're gonna close this one out, up the next one in a second. The way this works is as we go through this one, we'll look around the table. With all due deference, we'll be looking around the table for the continuing board members, sorry, Kathleen, because we're gonna vote on it at the next meeting, but it will see if we have a quorum here that says they would go with it. And if they do, if there's no objection, then it'll be on for adoption at the next meeting. If we don't have that, then we either pull it back, or it could come forward for discussion and maybe a first read at the table. We consider this to be the first read as we go through it tonight. The changes we're making are necessarily strongly
Next
substantive.
meeting, I think it's.
The next meeting, well, we have a reorganization meeting. I don't think we're doing business at the
21st of
reorganization meeting.
September, or December.
21st of December.
So having said that, I think we pretty much went through most public comment.
I don't have any initial comments on that particular.
Terrific.
Jim,
From the-
did you have anything else to say?
No, I'm good.
From the board members, is there any disagreement or objection to bring this forward for approval of the next, with the changes that we've discussed this evening? All right, so this will be up on the 21st for adoption. Thank you. We try and time box, I was saying that before, we try actually to hold this meeting in 2 hours, but we're not really strict about it.
Well, we only have one more policy, so you're good.
The first one took an hour.
This is related.
This
There
is
is a-
policy
this
248.
Yeah, this policy, OCR asked us to just bring this policy in line with 103. And so the changes, we tried to make the investigative process the same and the reporting requirements the same. So it's not, it has definitions of what constitutes harassment, and it's a specific policy designed to the issue of harassment as opposed to discrimination. There can be a difference.
Would it have made sense at some level to create an additional policy, which is the investigation policy for harassment and discrimination, just pull them into one and simplify? If we've aligned them, I just worry because over time I have to keep them aligned. And does it make life simpler going on that we have a policy on the investigation process, brings that all together and aligns it as one, and then we simply reference that investigation's done under the policy, or follow investigation policy XYZ.
It's up to you. I work for you.
I know, but I mean, you wrote them. The two are that closely aligned that they are identical? Or?
I believe they are identical. I tried to make them identical.
If there's an investigative policy that covers all the other policies, it'd certainly be probably easier to pull it out.
Well, there's, I think the investigative policy, the reason they're not together is because there are, people could file a complaint or see the discrimination the non-discrimination policy and not realize that there's a harassment policy that's separate. In addition to that, there's also harassment policies 348 and 448 that address our employees. So the investigation under the harassment policy 248 applying to students primarily, and the 103 policies are identical in the investigative.
So that even though duplicative for us internally,
Exactly.
it provides for better transparency to the public, just to help that. I think that's a great answer.
I see where you're going, but
I'm just trying to make life easier for boards in the future who have to change their policies.
even if we decide to do that in the interest of codifying these now, I would have said, let's still vote on this and we'll circle back, but okay.
All right, so the yellow parts are the parts that are
You?
Substantially changed.
That particular yellow section was the language provided to me by OCR.
all right, and we're in the third part of the discussion, which goes back to that same thing we
Right.
talked about before. All right. Is there more that changes that way as well?
I'm just curious, on this copy, we've got a scratch to third parties.
Yes, because OCR told me that, that after they first told me about the third party issue and that I should add it, that it was overbroad. So, so despite my discussions with them, they.
I guess so my question would be, so this falls within students or pupils.
Yes.
And my question would be, and it's not third-party contractors or something like that, just put it way out there, but what about students from another school that are here for another event or for anything else, or would they be covered under here?
Well.
Or is this only our students and
No.
also our students in other places?
Well, that depends. I had that discussion with OCR as well. Because it seemed to me that it would be very difficult for us to discipline a student from another school who engaged in some, harassment of one of our students, say at a sporting event, which is a very likely time when something like that might happen. And what I was told and what I thought was that we could not discipline the student. We could kick the student out from the event. We could remove the student who was being offensive or in violation of our policy from our event. We could direct that student not return to any of our school district events. But what we couldn't do is discipline the student in the student's own school district. We could ask for the cooperation of the student's school district in engaging in discipline and investigation of the event and cooperate with an investigation.
Or we would refer to law enforcement.
Or we could refer it to law enforcement, absolutely, yes.
Now, could we go after our kids who do something in violation of policy who are outside of our school grounds?
We could.
Attending a school event.
Attending a school event.
Yes.
Since we brought up sports events, does PIAA have, does this align with,
Well, PIAA,
not that I care, other than just, I'm asking the question.
I confess that I am not a PIAA expert. However, my experience with PIAA's rules are that they do have codes of conduct that apply to their staff members and to the students, but that I have not seen specific ones. I could be wrong. I haven't seen specific ones that prohibit harassment and things like that. I haven't seen them. They may exist.
And again, we have our policies, they're a separate entity, but I was curious.
So given we're scratching third party as an authority after, I'm trying to follow what you got up here. What we got down here.
In 2 places.
Wait a second.
Under authority, we're on delegation of responsibility. Jump back up to the top.
It's
Under authority, second, so you're scratching third parties, and then the term third parties includes, are you pulling that out because you scratched third parties, so there's no need to define it?
So these are credits, I'm going to refer to this being not in yellow.
It should be out, right?
Well, no. This 248 is a policy designed to apply to our students.
Right.
Third parties, though, could be individuals who engage in harassment. And so we wanted to define what the term third parties was for purposes of defining those who might be in violation of the policy because they themselves are the person who violates the
I
policy.
guess I struggle because we define third party, but we don't see third party used.
We do.
We do.
Where am I not
Under
seeing it?
delegation of responsibilities, number 1.
Okay.
Wait. To
Well, I didn't get
Andy's
there
point.
yet, so I'd say.
To Andy's point, at the top, it appears that in the printed form, that third parties is struck out.
Right.
So if you are a visiting student from another sports team, and I am some student at Council Rock, and I harass you because of some attribute that is not appropriate to be harassed about. Not that anyone should, but are we saying that our students, that we're not prohibiting that harassment here because we struck it? So we're only prohibiting harassment of students?
It says harassment of students by all district students.
But, so I'm a parent of a student and I come. And I'm being harassed by your students. We struck out and third parties here. So are we not holding our students to the standard that they should not, and staff, that they should not be harassing people?
Well, I see third parties not struck out.
It's struck
right
out.
above it, right above it.
Yeah.
It's struck
Yeah,
out.
And
you're-
third parties in schools.
Right.
Yeah, so so why are we striking that thing? Because we don't want our students harassing each other or anybody else. Okay. Board prohibits all forms of unlawful.
I'm sorry, I'm looking just, maybe I'm stupid.
Harassment of students and third parties.
That this is crossed out up here,
Yeah,
and this is crossed out up here.
yeah.
And the line right above that second one, Jerry.
Right, well, the second one says.
Family members and third parties in schools.
Well,
And that's.
Oh, I got you.
Right there.
Okay, I got it, okay.
Yeah, I had a hard time finding it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's used and defined
I'm
right
sorry,
away.
I'm looking for the word gender. Sorry.
If you can just blank it out, it reads quite normal, but
Yeah,
the strike throughs are what's causing you.
Cutting it down, yeah.
I thought I read normally when I wrote it, but I.
It does read quite normal. Yeah, no, it's just, the strike through is, if they weren't here, no one would ever say anything.
Wait a minute, so, I'm sorry. To your point, Jerry,
Let's read it aloud. Let's leave it read. The board prohibits all forms of unlawful harassment of students by all district students and staff members, contract individuals, vendors, volunteers, visitors, individuals, and groups using district property for school-related activities and parent, guardians, or other family members and third parties in the schools. The board encourages students who have been harassed to promptly report such incidents to the designated employees. It doesn't read.
Yeah, it doesn't read.
It doesn't read right. What does it
Because we're not responsible for prohibiting harassment of third parties.
No, I understand that, but that's not, it's just, it doesn't read that way to me. I get what you're saying, but as I read this,
Well, see, here's what.
We have a non-discrimination, non-harassment policy in 103 that prohibits discrimination and harassment against all. This unlawful harassment policy
students.
applies to our students.
Only.
So it's only to our students. That's, so if I'm accompanying my student to, I'm from Central Bucks, and I'm accompanying my student, I came to watch my son play football. And I'm in the stands, and someone comes up and picks at me because I'm Jewish. Okay? Am I?
You're not a student. It's
I'm not a
this
student.
policy, it's 103.
So they're gonna make, so I'm gonna complain, and it's gonna come back, that student who's harassing me is gonna be picked up under policy 103, not 248.
Right.
I guess, yeah.
I was confused, but okay, as long as,
This is only students,
okay.
pupils. That was.
So is it, so that the whole section pupils, does every policy in there under pupils refer to those pupils as students? And might not it make sense to change pupils to students or students to pupils?
I doubt it. There's a lot of the following it.
We
We're at
didn't vote.
248, I mean, we're at 248, so there's 201, 202. I suspect that students is used.
No, so my question would be where if students is used all the way through the policies, should we change the section?
So you want to vote on all 248 of them again?
No, he wants to use it as, he wants to call it
Well, that would.
pupils.
Change that section header.
I don't want to change the bottom if they're all the same. I'm just
Right.
saying, if it says pupils up here on all of them and the content says students, shouldn't we align it to say students is the?
Well, and I guess what I'm saying, as soon as you make that change, we have to vote on it. And any policy.
Those are in the consent agenda.
Okay.
Not a big deal, right? Yeah, exactly.
Check it out.
All right, that was confusing.
Under step 2 investigation, should we add that language that exists in 103 that the superintendent is notified or his or her designee? Yeah, I'll add that in.
Well, and then also taking from this policy speaks to posting to the website as public posting. I don't believe that's in the previous policy we read.
No, I don't think it is either, Jim.
Well, there's a different, There is a difference between the harassment policy and the harassment policy 248 and the non-discrimination policy that applies to everyone. So it's posted, it can go to the website, there's training on it, it's part of the public record. This policy is certainly on our website, and I presume it's in the student handbook and things of that nature. I don't have a problem.
No, but I'm just confused. See, 248, the new 248 specifically says
It will be posted.
it says posting it on the website fulfills the requirement of public notification. And in this one, it simply says, in the one we already discussed previously, shall disseminate this policy and complaint at least annually to students, parents, guardians, employees, and to the public. And all I would ask is that we pick up that framework under that statement that says posting it to the website fulfills that requirement. That was all I was. Christine, you got what I'm trying to do? Just because I just want to. I had the question. Everybody said, "Well, it's on the website," but we didn't talk about it anywhere. Then we did explicitly for the next one. We have to go through on definitions from 248. Is gender an issue here again?
I added it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, tell us.
So it's already added?
I did add
Okay,
gender.
okay. Anything else of note here we need to?
Have you done public comment?
No, we've not gone through final board call.
No, I meant for this fall.
Public comment. We haven't done public comment on this yet. We've just done
We're still doing board call.
board discussion, board comment. None, we're good. Public comment.
Yeah. Mark Weinstein. And I'm looking at the current harassment policy and in particular the definition section. And just by way of reminder, the definition in 248 is of critical importance not only for the application of 248, but also because it serves as the definition for harassment under 103 and I think a few other policies. So it's important that it is sufficiently inclusive. And what I'm looking at here is on the new policy, page 1 under definitions. The definition is for purposes of this policy, harassment shall consist of verbal, written, graphic, or physical conduct relating to, and then there's all the categories. When such conduct is, and then it's got to be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, or 3. Is it? Are those ors in between? Does it have to be one of those or all of them?
One of them.
Okay, so it has to be sufficiently severe, persistent, or pervasive, such that it affects an individual's ability to participate in or benefit from an educational program or activity, or it has to create an intimidating, threatening, or abusive educational environment. Or it has to have the purpose or effect of substantially or unreasonably interfering with an individual's academic performance. Or it has to adversely affect the individual's learning opportunities. And I guess my reaction to all that is it really seems like a lot of stuff that's really hard to define. And if you look at the current policy, it seems the current policy seems to be much more direct and inclusive. It says impermissible discrimination and/or harassment may take many forms, including verbal conduct such as epithets, derogatory or degrading comments, slurs, or telephone calls, invitations, or comments, visual conduct such as derogatory posters, cartoons, drawings, letters, notes, or gestures. And even has retaliation for having reported the harassment or discrimination, all of which is great because the current harassment policy says that just saying an epithet can in and of itself be harassment, which I agree. The new policy says if I just say an epithet, there are all these other things that have to be demonstrated before it's harassment. So I have to show that, the student hearing that epithet affect the student's ability to participate in or benefit from an educational program, or created an intimidating, threatening, or abusive educational environment, so on and so forth. So I guess I don't understand why the definition is being watered down and burdened with all these additional requirements to demonstrate harassment.
I defer to the president of this, the leader of this Mary Beth.
I don't know what the impetus was for changing it. What I say may not be popular, but I wonder about it too, which is, unfortunately, we're a school. And, someone saying an epithet one time and rising to the level of, it may actually, this may be unpopular, that may be the learning experience, that somebody corrects that kid and puts him back on track and says why that's not right. I don't know. I'm thinking, I'm just, it's conversation. If we don't have conversation, it's not a pleasant conversation. If the kid calls me a name based on something and someone else corrects him and puts him on the right track, I'd like to think that's done. I'd like to think that that's been corrected. Children make mistakes. Yeah, so I'm struggling with it.
Who's going to correct them though, if nothing?
Well, that's where it becomes, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, so let's say that happens. Let's say another student called another student name in a classroom, but it's not harassment, it's not discrimination. So the teacher is not obligated to say anything. So the student gets away with it, and somebody says, "Oh, let's just let that go. Just don't let it happen." Then they go to the next class. And
I hear you. That
goes back to the reasonable.
That becomes pervasive.
That's around training. I mean, I read this and they kind of say the same things. I mean, I see epithet covered as verbal, and depending on what the epithet might be, it's going to impact different students differently. One might think it's,
Well, but so then does it become subjective? I mean, that it makes.
Well, it's a reasonable man thing again. Which,
right.
Look, in the office, I was at an event many years ago, and people were talking about something, and someone said, "Well, that kid's he's acting retarded." Right?
Kids what?
Someone was talking about a kid and said, "Well, he's acting retarded." And I looked at him and I said, that's really not the right way to go on that. And we talked about it. And that was done. And that was people. Now, maybe you're right. Maybe they were only sensitive about that when I was around, but I don't know. But that was a conversation. So I'm trying to figure out in a school district if someone said something like that, because I've seen other kids step up and correct other kids. So I don't know. See, that's my problem. I want to have a policy, but I also need kids to learn from it, and I don't know that. So that's what I'm struggling with.
Well, I guess I don't understand what would be the problem if an African-American student was called the N-word by another student. Why shouldn't that be documented and investigated consistent with this policy? I mean, how many times?
It is though. You got
no, but it's not.
Severe.
We'd have to demonstrate that hearing that affected that student's ability to participate in or benefit from an educational program or activity, or created an intimidating, threatening, or abusive educational environment, or had the purpose or effect of substantially interfering with the person's academic performance or affected the individual's learning opportunities.
Which I think it would.
Well, I think the key here.
Absolutely it would.
But you could easily, Jerry just said it. It was just one time. It's okay. We corrected them. Let it go. I think the point is that I don't think anybody's suggesting that if that happened, that somebody wouldn't address it in the right way. But the problem comes into play with, I think we've talked about before, is if something happens and it's not in policy the right way, if you're not here and Christine's not here and Robert's not here, then the next people that see this say, oh, that's not really a problem.
But going back to reasonable man, so somebody makes a judgment call and it's the wrong one, hopefully that's going to get escalated and we'll be able to discipline. That's part of the reason that, we're focusing on training and focusing more on these things.
But it would have to be escalated.
But it does feel a little restrictive because, I mean, I can see a situation of a student having to deal with harassment but still performing well in school.
Right.
And so, all of these reasons do connect to the education. And I'm just curious, Joanne, I mean, I didn't pick it up, I didn't look at this carefully before now, but this disconnect between the previous definitions and the current one seems pretty vast. So what is your?
Well, this, between OCR's reading of the statutes and the reading of the case law in this area, in my opinion, the definition section as it reads now, and this is PSBA's view as well, is more inclusive than limiting someone to read these things and saying, well, this didn't really happen, but there was some other incident that happened and maybe it doesn't come within the policy. So by listing it as a verbal comment, as we talked about before, one verbal comment might adversely affect someone. And that person, under our policy, makes a complaint. You don't make a complaint if you're not adversely affected by it.
Okay.
So the whole point is to make it as inclusive as possible and give people the opportunity to make a complaint when there is something that has been offensive to them, or someone has seen something that is offensive and they can, make the complaint. The definition is for a finding that the harassment occurred. Someone who files a complaint of harassment because there was a verbal epithet used to that person, and it is investigated and it is determined that it was used and obviously had, affected the individual, or they wouldn't be coming forward.
I understand. Let me ask you a question. Okay. So in the course of all of these things that have happened, I've had conversations with my children who are long gone from school. And it came out, I learned this many years later, 8 years later, that my son had a period of time of being exposed to some anti-Semitic actions from, which he sort of laughed off. He did not suffer academically. And, he talked with his friends, whatever. I believe that if that had happened today, the atmosphere of things, I think he would have told me about it and it would have risen to a different level maybe. In that situation, is he covered? Is it because of the other things? So it's not, I just want to make sure that that is,
it's
absolutely
covered.
Because you're saying it sounds, you're saying this is less restrictive, but in my perception is it is more restrictive. So the earlier policy feels broader, but you're saying it's the opposite because it's isolated so many just specifics, and you're saying that the new is, there's enough language that broadens that?
You could certainly take the new definition and give examples using some of the language from the old policy, and maybe that would solve some of the concern. My opinion is that the definitions here cover the majority of events, and OCR has reviewed this language.
And I think the intent of the group is to ensure that we've got the maximum flexibility to address situations
And
like this.
I have to tell you, under reading the old policy, were I aggressive, when that was in school, we would have had we could have complained constantly between being not ill-meaning, but people called him crippled. People told him he was wheelchair bound. They called him a bunch of terms which we don't tend to use. But under this, it was an epithet. He was a crippled. We don't use that term. He corrected people time and again. And ultimately laughed a lot of them off because he's hard to understand and was difficult for him to correct people. So I just want to be careful, because they weren't technically under the old policy. We should have been making complaints left and right, because those are epithets. We're stupid people. But those are epithets.
Our staff, our students, our community reads these things, and if there's a question, and if it is interpreted in a way that does not sound inclusive and understanding, I think those examples would help to clarify so that it is clear, because obviously we're talking about it. So I think it's a good solution could be to find language that just gives a little more dimension to it.
We certainly could use it. We could take the language from the old policy that says examples.
As long as it doesn't limit us.
But, well, you know, I would caution those examples all have an S at the end of it. So, and I guess I look at these and I question, when does offensive, which we can agree on, rise to harassment? And that's the line we're trying to draw.
And that's the investigation that the.
Yeah, you know, I mean, that's,
You can't define reasonable man here, that's
Well,
that's like, that's what it's coming back.
For me, when it comes down to, you know, and usually the examples we talked about with Nat, which was our issue with a lot of that, ultimately came down, we can't write a policy that speaks to intent. I don't think you can write a policy. Right. Because when you know, and that's where we as people always gave the leeway, which was people were stupid,
yeah,
but not with intent.
Yeah.
And that's where we came to. That was our problem.
Yeah.
That
it's being offensive without any ill will behind it.
You know, right? You know,
it doesn't make it less offensive.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't.
So,
I guess my question is, in looking at the new policy, I don't understand why you can't, on the definition, put the period after the word religion and leave out all these other tentacles of this definition that, if what you're saying is accurate, don't really even have any bearing on whether you're going to investigate.
I'm deferring to OCR, and
actually it's funny because I'm looking at the second one, which actually says purpose, which actually go to intent.
Right. Okay.
Why couldn't it just say, for purposes of this policy, harassment shall consist of verbal, written, graphic, or physical conduct relating to an individual's race, color, nationality, blah, 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 or religion, period. Because, if you're going to investigate.
Because it's not as simple as that.
What do you say is not as simple as that?
Yeah, I think now we're getting into the space where we talked about before, which is counsel to the board versus counsel to the public. I apologize for calling it off, but I have the sense from Joanne that's where we're walking into at this point.
I like the inclusion of some examples.
You can say again.
I like the inclusion of some examples to help that just give a little bit more dimension to what this means. And if it's worded in the way as not limited to these examples, but that I think that would give greater clarity.
We can certainly take the language from the original policy 248, which I drafted as well. And say that,
maybe or might be.
As long as it's not restrictive, I don't have a problem with a few
Right,
examples, as long as it's not.
included but not
As long as
limited
it doesn't
to.
restrict our powers.
Is that where we should put it?
Yeah, I would put it under definition, sure, but we can,
Well, I don't know.
I
think this is, to the process we described earlier, I think that we're going to let this be circulated, reworked a little bit, and
come back
recirculated
again.
to the board to say.
I think Mark's point is different substantially from the point that Denise is making, which I agree with, that perhaps additional definitions would be helpful. But I think what Mark is speaking to, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, speaks to the impact of the act, as in, it's not harassment unless it does 1 or 2 or 3, which to me implies that unless it really affects a student's ability to individual academic performance, individual learning opportunities, educational programs, unless there's a tangible impact, then it's not harassment. I think that's Mark's concern.
I think you heard me clearly.
And I think, and I understand that objection. I mean, to me, it speaks to sort of like the hostile environment concept.
Well, that's.
And maybe what I'm thinking is maybe there's a fourth point, which is simply that if the activity, the action creates a hostile environment for the student, then that is harassment, whether or not it affects their ability to learn.
Well, I would think that affects their ability to learn.
Well, I know what you're saying.
And when I look at this, for me, if I were working,
How would you know
hold
that?
on,
I
hold on.
don't know how you would. Do you realize that so many children are harassed in our school who don't speak up? They come home and tell their parents.
Right, so that's what I'm trying,
So I'm agreeing.
Okay.
And when I look at this, for me, trying to find the middle ground,
Right.
I think that item 1 creates a problem. So were I working alone on this, I would probably strike off item 1 and really focus more on the purpose or the effect of. You can leave those that are there substantially unreasonably interfering with the individual's academic performance, or had the intent of or purpose of demeaning and going through that phrase. Again, remember I spoke to intent before, where it actually tries to get to intent. So that, you're right, the people who called Nat crippled, if they didn't mean it that way, it's not what it was. It was stupid. If they're doing it because they're trying to say, you're this and that, and you can't do this, that's demeaning. Again, I'm trying to pick up that flavor of stupid versus.
But wouldn't that be pulled up in the investigation?
But I'm trying to. I hear what you say. I'm trying to figure out how. It would be. It could be. But I'm also trying to head off some of those investigations, which were just stupid people.
And I'm wrestling with and I'm thinking elementary school. When does being ill-informed, stupid, whatever, mistake, rise to
But my
harassment?
question is, as a parent, if it's happening in elementary school and we don't tackle it with the same intolerance to it, then it will happen in middle school and high school, and then we're putting out global citizens that
Right.
don't know that that's
Right.
wrong.
But if
even
we-
if they don't mean it, it's wrong.
If we investigate every kid that makes a mistake to the formal level we're damaging them too.
But not if
And
the
that's
investigation
the-
leads to result being education.
Isn't it about the consequence? Isn't that really what you're talking about? Nobody's saying we should throw these kids out of
Right.
school.
The answer
or,
could be education.
put them in, some kind of a suspension or something.
Well, but that actually is what comes. That actually.
Definitions are just so clear.
Yeah, that actually gets up to the point that, these things lead to suspension potential. So to your point, I'm reasonably okay as I sit here and think about it, getting rid of the point number 1 in this, because it does make it sound like it really has to rise to a dramatic level, but I'm trying to get to what the intent was. If the commentary was purposeful.
Except that it's there are statements, right?
Right.
Yeah, but I get rid of 1. But so I'm trying to beef up 1.
Well, before you make
Go ahead.
those decisions, why don't you
Well, that's what we were going to turn it back to.
provide you with the legal rationale as an opinion letter?
Yeah, because the way I read this is, and you said it before, is either somebody's going to witness, a staff member is going to witness this and take action, hopefully. If they don't, because the reasonable man standard isn't there, hopefully the child also reports it. And hopefully through our training, we can get better at it, or we address it more aggressively when we find out somebody missed something.
Okay.
But we want the ability to either file a complaint or to take action on something that somebody sees, right? Is that the intent?
Yes.
Okay.
For the purposes of our discussion right now, let's look at that first section of definitions. And we're going to turn it back to Joanne and Christine to rework. She'll give us a private, confidential memo of the board back with the legal opinion.
So question, is this something that we need to bring back, Jerry, or can we take a look at the language and if?
I was gonna let, she'll provide us an opinion. We can actually talk about it at the board table if we want to.
Okay.
I was gonna try and say, not to say stipulate, but just set aside the first part of page 1 definitions and go through the rest of this and see if the rest of it holds together, meaning that if we finally decide what it is.
I just want to attempt not to come back to wait till another.
I agree. So I'm trying to say, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to put aside the bottom of page 1 and work through the rest of this document so that if that's the only part we have to deal with, we can talk about that at a board meeting.
And approve it that night.
Exactly.
Keep it off. I'm sure you'd be thrilled to hear, I just have one more comment about
Right.
this section.
I don't like page 3 through 4. That's 2 through 4.
No, but I
Go
think
ahead.
it's important.
About the
because-
same section we're talking about.
Yeah, because it doesn't seem to address what is one of the greatest sources or channels of harassment today, and that is electronic communication and social media, text messaging. And, you know, a lot of that goes on at school. I know it goes on at school because we have 4 teenagers, okay? So my question is, when I understand the school can't do anything about things that happen when students are not at school, okay, or not at school functions, but what happens when students are using social media while at school?
We have an answer.
Have a policy.
Okay.
Yeah, we already, I think.
Well, it's actually
we
two things.
That's part of this?
One, we have an electronic device policy. Second of all, that communication, unless you have a different way of using your phone than I do, is either verbal, written, or graphic.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a separate.
But just to be clear, so we can go right, didn't we discussed
There is a policy.
policy recently that addressed social media and harassment on social media.
But to your
We had a
point, in
discussion
this
about
policy,
that,
it's either verbal, graphic, or written, so.
because we had a
it is
debate
covered.
over what was included in
And
there. so.
as long as, you know, we have you, you know, advising us that you think it's included, that's fine. Thank you.
Her opinion counts on that one.
To the extent that it's done in school.
Or when they
Right.
bring the device to school, even though they didn't write it at school, they bring the
If-
device to school, now they're showing us other
But they're
kids.
showing people that it's
Okay.
communicating, they're communicating.
That's
Right.
indiscreet.
If they had the message on their device and kept it in their pocket, no one knew about it,
Right, right.
there's no discussion.
Still
All right.
providing disruption.
So setting aside page 1, just trying to get, anything else here that poses a challenge or a question for the board? Let's go through the board first. Did we exhaust board commentary on the rest of this?
I don't have any comments on the rest of it. Again, I defer to our council and OCR. I mean,
All right, and so I think we had opened the public comment. I think everybody was pretty okay with. All right, so here's what's going on with this one. We're not gonna we're not gonna vote this one explicitly. We're not gonna take it as it is tonight. But Joanne will work with Christine. She'll provide discussion, which will include some of the rationale for it. I think that actually is a privileged document because it may have some background which relates to things the board
And Joanne
works
will
with privately. But then we will, depending on how that looks, we will potentially have this as an item at our 21st meeting, where we'll review that section, particularly that section of definition, in discussion before we decide whether to vote or set this one back.
Yeah.
Okay, does
So
that
just,
work for the board?
just for clarification, so I will put this on the agenda for the 21st. It'll be-
Why don't we wait till we react to that?
That was gonna be my
Right, I
comment
would
now.
pencil it in,
Never mind.
I'd pencil it in for the agenda on the 21st, but it is really based on the board's affirmation that we want to go forward with it, because she'll provide that documentation to us.
There's more.
But wait, before you buy.
If we don't move on 248, can we still move on?
Yes.
Okay,
They're
that's
not.
fine.
They are linked. in
They are
some-
linked, so-
They are linked in the sense that OCR wanted us to make changes to both.
Okay.
But
Okay,
I am sure they would be fine if we
okay.
deal
Now you
with
got
it.
it. Okay, so that's all.
Nice to meet you. All right, that concludes the, is there any other new business from the board on the old business that we had to settle from the board from a policy perspective? No. So now we get into public comment, which we ask just for 3 minutes. We're gonna try and time box, so we'd like to leave around 9, but we'll take public comment now. depending on how many people want to talk.
I just have two that'll go. Harassment is a series of events. It's not one epithet, okay? When I was in the Army and I signed up for infantry as opposed to armor, 3 of us got harassed because we didn't go into infantry. And it went on and on and on. Harassment is a series of events. It's not one epithet that otherwise you're gonna have political speech police here continue. It'll go on and on, ad infinitum, ad nauseam. The only other comment I have is I have no objection to gender identity being included in that preemptory paragraph, but I think unless you recite Title IX or some exclusion, Title IX allows you to have separate bathrooms, you know that, or Title VII. So unless you put that in there, I think someone will jump in there and say, okay, based on that, you're discriminating on the trains, and they'll sue. I think you gotta be real careful. But I have no objection to having it included as far as harassment. That's fine. I'm done.
Thank you.
The only thing I'd like to add that
Just
help.
your name and.
Yeah, my name is Katia Weisman. What it would probably help is to provide a legal definition of what harassment means. What worries me in what you have written right now is looking at the impact. I know people, students who are resilient and have bounced back even when they have been harassed, and they are still good students, but the emotional damage that causes harassment is cannot be, it's lifelong. So I would strongly encourage you to examine that part and looking at the impact of harassment, just focus mostly on the actions and provide a definition of what it is harassment. And I was just Googling online, there are so many legal definitions that looks at threatening, intimidating that person, even if it happens once. And if not 13 events and that happen in history, but only if it takes one time that a student can feel threatened and intimidated. And we don't have to wait until the grades go down and he takes a test that it could be reported and it should be reported and evaluated that incident at that time. So that's just my.
We're good. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for participating.